For centuries, women have been told to be flawless, polite but assertive, attractive but modest, ambitious yet selfless. This impossible equation shapes the phantom of the perfect woman, an image as rigid and punishing as stone. In mythology, Medusa is feared because of her gaze, but in truth she embodies a woman punished for transgressing the roles assigned to her. By reclaiming Medusa's archetype, we reveal the cracks in this impossible ideal. Like Medusa, many women today are condemned for simply existing outside of the rules. If you're ambitious, you're too much. If you're quiet, you're not enough. The perfect woman narrative isn't an aspiration, it's a trap. Understanding this dynamic is the first step towards psychological freedom. Stoic philosophy teaches that our power lies not in controlling others, but in mastering our own responses. Applied to the myth of female perfection, Stoicism becomes a shield. You no longer bend to the gaze of others, but define yourself on your own terms. Medusa's head of serpents can then be read as a symbol of multiplicity, many facets, many selves, all valid. By deconstructing the perfect woman ideal, you don't become indifferent or cold. You become whole. This shift isn't about rejecting care, beauty, or ambition. It's about freeing them from external judgment and reclaiming them as choices rather than obligations. It's about transforming shame into agency. This series is an invitation. Stop polishing the mask and start strengthening the core. Be like Medusa, unapologetic, self-defined, and anchored in reason. Through psychology and Stoic practice, you will learn how to dismantle internalized perfectionism, manage anxiety born of social pressure, and stand firm in your authentic identity. This is not just another motivational talk about leaning in or having it all. This is a deep exploration of how the myth of the perfect woman has shaped our inner lives, and how women today can dismantle it without losing their humanity. Using the Medusa archetype as a mirror and Stoic philosophy as a guide, we will examine the psychological cost of perfectionism and the liberating power of self-definition. Every lesson, every example is designed to be practical, so you can apply it to your daily life, not just reflect on it in theory. Here, perfectionism is not treated as a harmless drive for excellence, but as a system of control, a subtle form of anxiety that drains energy, breeds self-doubt, and keeps women in a perpetual state of self-surveillance. By looking at Medusa differently, not as a monster, but as a symbol of the punished outsider who reclaims her own power, we create a new psychological map. This map helps you move from self-criticism to self-command, from performing for others to living from your core values. If this resonates with you, subscribe to this channel, like this video, and share it with someone who needs to hear that perfection is not the price of dignity. In the comments, tell us which country and city you're watching from. Your voice matters here because the perfect woman myth is global, but the way we resist it can be local, contextual, and personal. Together we will build a community of women learning to look back at the world with a steady gaze, to set clear boundaries, and to live with authenticity rather than fear. Perfectionism doesn't begin with personal failure. It begins with cultural messaging. From early childhood, girls are praised for being good, pretty, helpful, and polite. These seemingly benign expectations lay the groundwork for a self-concept built on approval rather than authenticity. By the time a woman enters adolescence, she has internalized a script of how she should look, speak, and feel. The perfect woman is not just an external ideal. She becomes an internal judge, silently evaluating every choice. This internalized judge produces anxiety that often feels personal but is actually systemic. A young professional who hesitates to speak up in a meeting may not be shy by nature. She may have absorbed the idea that assertiveness is unfeminine. A mother who feels guilty for taking time to herself may not lack love for her family. She may have been taught that self-care is selfish. These examples show how social norms masquerade as personal shortcomings, creating an invisible prison. Recognizing this dynamic is the first crack in the stone mask of perfection. Medusa's myth becomes a powerful counter-narrative here. In most retellings, she is depicted as a monstrous figure whose gaze turns men to stone. Yet in the earliest sources, Medusa was a mortal priestess punished for transgressing a divine boundary she did not choose. She becomes a monster not by nature but by transformation, symbolizing how society vilifies women who break its codes. For modern women, embracing the Medusa archetype means accepting the multiplicity of the self, the serpents of many identities, and refusing to apologize for stepping outside imposed roles. When you start to see perfectionism as a form of social conditioning rather than a personal flaw, you create room for compassion toward yourself. This shift is crucial. Compassion does not weaken discipline, it redirects it. Instead of spending your energy trying to meet contradictory standards, you invest it in aligning your actions with your values. This is precisely what Stoic philosophy teaches. We can't control the judgments of others, but we can control the integrity of our own choices. Practically, this means replacing self-monitoring with self-inquiry. A woman preparing for a presentation might pause and ask, "Am I rehearsing this to communicate clearly or to avoid criticism?" The answer reveals whether the effort is grounded in excellence or in fear. This kind of reflective questioning dismantles the invisible scripts that keep perfectionism alive. Over time, the inner judge loses authority and the authentic self gains strength. Medusa's serpents can be a helpful visual here. Each serpent represents a facet of your identity that you've been told is too much or not enough: your ambition, your softness, your sexuality, your intellect. Instead of trying to hide or tame these parts, you allow them to coexist. In psychological terms, this is integration, the process of acknowledging and owning all aspects of yourself rather than splitting them into acceptable and unacceptable. Integration reduces inner conflict and builds resilience. Another Stoic principle that supports this work is the dichotomy of control, distinguishing what is within your power from what is not. You cannot control whether society approves of you, but you can control whether you compromise your principles to gain that approval. You cannot control if someone labels you too ambitious or not feminine, but you can decide whether those labels define you. This practice, repeated daily, gradually reorients your emotional energy away from external validation and toward internal stability. Setting boundaries is a natural consequence of this reorientation. Once you see perfectionism as a form of control, you stop offering unlimited access to your time, your emotional labor, and your self-image. Boundaries are not walls but filters. They allow you to give generously without depletion. A boundary might be as simple as declining an extra project at work without apology, or as profound as redefining what partnership looks like in your personal life. Each boundary you draw chips away at the myth of the perfect woman and makes space for the real one. Solitude also becomes redefined. In a culture that equates busyness with worth, choosing solitude can feel like failure. But for women breaking the perfectionism script, solitude is a laboratory for self-knowledge. Like Medusa exiled to her cave, you discover that being away from constant scrutiny is not a punishment, but an opportunity to see yourself clearly. Solitude can be intentional moments in a day or longer periods of stepping back from social media or certain relationships to regain perspective. A practical daily exercise to anchor, this is the Stoic Evening Review. At the end of each day, instead of evaluating whether you were perfect, you ask, "Did I act in alignment with my values today? Where did I compromise? What will I choose differently tomorrow?" This is not self-criticism but self-correction, an empowering ritual that replaces the endless self-surveillance of perfectionism with deliberate self-governance. Another exercise is to rewrite your internal script about mistakes. In perfectionism, mistakes are threats to identity. In Stoicism, they are data. When you reframe mistakes as information rather than evidence of inadequacy, you free yourself to experiment and grow. This shift directly reduces anxiety, because anxiety thrives on the belief that every misstep is catastrophic. It also fosters courage, a key Stoic virtue and a trait exemplified by Medusa, who despite being demonized retains her power. Ultimately, the goal of this first stage is not to reject the idea of excellence, but to reclaim it as yours. Excellence is a choice, not a performance. When you act from authenticity, you may still be excellent, but you're no longer enslaved to the myth of the perfect woman. You move from stone to movement, from rigidity to agency. This is the beginning of being like Medusa, not a monster, not a victim, but a figure of unapologetic self-possession. If Chapter 1 exposed the architecture of perfectionism, Chapter 2 explores how to dismantle it piece by piece in daily life. Knowing that the perfect woman is a social construct is not enough. You must practice acting outside its rules to loosen its hold on your nervous system. This is where psychology and Stoicism converge. Behavioral experiments paired with reflective practice gradually retrain your mind and body. One of the first experiments is to let go of micro-perfections. Choose a small arena, sending an email without rereading it 5 times, posting a photo without editing, voicing an opinion without apologizing, and allow imperfection to be visible. Each time you do this, your nervous system learns that the world does not collapse when you are imperfect. This is exposure therapy applied to perfectionism, and it's an antidote to the constant anxiety of self-monitoring. Another practice is deliberate boundary setting in low-stakes situations. Decline a minor invitation, ask for clarification in a meeting, or tell a friend you can't talk right now. These small acts teach your brain that boundaries do not destroy relationships, but clarify them. Over time, you develop an embodied sense of self-respect that no external judgment can easily shake. Stoic journaling deepens these behavioral shifts. At the start of each day, write down 3 things you can control and 3 things you cannot. This primes your mind to act on the controllables and release the uncontrollables. At the end of the day, review your actions through the same lens. The repetition rewires your focus away from external evaluation and toward internal mastery. As with Medusa, embracing your multiplicity is key. Every time you show a new facet, anger, ambition, vulnerability, humor, you reclaim territory from the perfect woman myth. In psychology, this is called self-complexity. The more aspects of self you acknowledge and express, the less any single failure or criticism can destabilize you. Your identity becomes like a net rather than a single thread, stronger, more flexible, and more resilient. Another essential step in dismantling the perfect woman ideal is learning to separate feedback from identity. Perfectionism fuses external evaluation with self-worth, so even constructive criticism can feel like a personal attack. A Stoic approach asks you to pause before reacting. When feedback arrives, ask yourself, what is within my control here? Can I use this information to improve, or is it merely a projection of someone else's expectations? This simple question helps you respond with reason instead of reflex. Breathing techniques can support this pause. Slow diaphragmatic breathing 4 counts in, 6 counts out calms the nervous system and creates a buffer between stimulus and response. Practicing this before meetings, difficult conversations, or social media interactions helps you stay grounded. In Stoic terms, you are strengthening the ruling faculty, the part of the mind that decides how to interpret events. You can also experiment with role reversal. When you notice self-criticism rising, imagine speaking to a friend instead. Would you judge her as harshly? Would you call her lazy for resting or selfish for saying no? This cognitive reframe reveals the double standards you've internalized and trains you to extend fairness to yourself. Over time, your internal voice becomes less punitive and more instructive. Community plays a role here too. Medusa is often depicted alone, yet she also becomes a symbol for collective female rage and solidarity. In practical terms, finding or creating spaces where women can share experiences without performance support groups, professional circles, book clubs helps you normalize imperfection. Witnessing others' struggles chips away at the illusion that everyone else is managing perfectly. Finally, keep a running list of moments when imperfection led to unexpected benefits. A mistake that sparked creativity, a boundary that deepened a relationship, a pause that prevented burnout. Reviewing this list reminds you that loosening the grip of perfectionism is not a loss but a gain. It reinforces the new belief that authenticity breeds resilience, connection, and growth, precisely the opposite of what the myth of the perfect woman teaches. The work of unlearning the perfect woman myth is not only behavioral, it is also narrative. You cannot fully free yourself if you still tell your story in the language of deficiency. Every culture transmits stories about what makes a woman worthy. These stories are rarely neutral, they carry moral weight. To reclaim your power, you must learn to edit and rewrite your own narrative with deliberate honesty, not performative gloss. Begin by identifying the dominant story you have been living. It might sound like, I am only valuable if I am productive, I must be attractive to be loved, or I should never make anyone uncomfortable. Write it down as plainly as possible. Seeing the story in black and white reveals its structure and absurdity. In psychology, this is called cognitive diffusion, stepping back from your thoughts so you can observe rather than obey them. Once the story is visible, you can offer it a counterstory grounded in your values. If your old story says, I am valuable when I please others, your counterstory might be, I am valuable because I act with integrity, even when others disapprove. This is not empty affirmation. It's a statement of principle. Each time you act in alignment with the new story, you reinforce a different neural pathway. Over time, the old script weakens. The Medusa archetype supports this reframing. Medusa was vilified in art and literature for centuries, but modern retellings reclaim her as a figure of resistance. When you consciously reinterpret your own myth, you follow the same process, taking an image imposed upon you and redefining it on your own terms. This is a form of narrative self-defense. It transforms shame into a source of strength. Another exercise is to examine the metaphors you use about yourself. Perfectionism often breeds metaphors of machinery. I have to keep running. I'm breaking down, or purity. I can't stain my record. I must stay spotless. Replace them with metaphors of growth and movement. I'm unfolding. I'm learning. I'm evolving. The language you choose directs your perception, and perception directs your emotional life, a core Stoic insight. Rewriting your story does not mean denying pain or injustice. It means refusing to be defined solely by them. Acknowledging what hurt you while also acknowledging what you chose, learned, or created is an act of psychological integration. In practice, this might look like adding a second sentence after recounting a difficult event. This happened becomes this happened. And here's how I responded. That small addition shifts you from passive subject to active agent. Journaling can become a daily ritual for this narrative work. Each night, pick one experience that triggered perfectionism and describe it neutrally. Then write a second version that emphasizes your values, boundaries, or courage in that moment. Over weeks, These rewritten stories accumulate into a new self-image grounded in reality rather than the perfect woman script. A key Stoic practice here is distinguishing between reputation and character. Reputation is what others believe. Character is what you build. The perfect woman myth traps you in reputation, measuring worth by how seamlessly you fit an image. Medusa's example reminds you that character can thrive even under vilification. You do not have to wait for public approval to claim integrity. Another supportive tactic is mindful consumption. The stories you take in through social media, advertising, even conversations, reinforce or challenge your internal script. Audit your feeds and circles. Ask, does this content invite me to expand or to conform? Does it spark courage or shame? Curating your inputs is not escapism. It's mental hygiene, especially when dismantling deeply ingrained myths. This chapter closes with a simple daily question. What part of my story did I reclaim today? It could be small, a boundary held, a self-criticism challenged, a moment of rest without guilt. Tracking these moments provides evidence that you are not just thinking differently, you are living differently. Over time, the new story ceases to be an exercise and becomes your default identity. Multifaceted, self-authored, resilient, more like Medusa than the perfect woman ever allowed. Once you have begun to rewrite your story and practice self-defined boundaries, the next step is mastering emotional autonomy. The perfect woman myth thrives on emotional reactivity. Guilt, shame, anxiety, and the compulsion to please are its instruments. Learning to observe these emotions without being ruled by them is central to both Stoic practice and the Medusa archetype. Medusa's gaze symbolizes the power of perception. She turns to stone those who confront her, not because of their fault, but because her presence reflects their projection. Similarly, your emotional responses can be seen as reflections of others' expectations rather than facts about yourself. Start by practicing the pause. When you notice anxiety rising over a social expectation or imagined judgment, don't react immediately. Step back, breathe, and observe the feeling without judgment. Label it, this is fear, or this is guilt. Naming emotions creates a cognitive distance that prevents automatic submission to perfectionist scripts. In psychology, this is often called emotional differentiation, a skill that separates you from the narrative of your feelings, allowing choice rather than reflex. Another practical approach is exposure to controlled discomfort. Say or do something that violates a perfectionist standard in a low-stakes context. Speak your mind in a meeting without over-apologizing or share an unpolished piece of work. Notice the emotional response that arises and simply observe it. Over time, this builds tolerance and demonstrates that the world does not collapse when you defy impossible expectations. Meditation and reflective writing deepen this practice. Each day, set aside a few minutes to reflect on moments when you experienced emotional turbulence. Ask yourself, did I let this emotion control me, or did I respond in alignment with my values? Tracking patterns highlights triggers and strengthens the ruling faculty, the Stoic concept for the part of your mind capable of reasoned choice. Emotional autonomy also requires examining the stories we tell ourselves about vulnerability. The perfect woman narrative equates vulnerability with weakness, teaching women to suppress needs, fears, or desires. Yet Stoicism and modern psychology both show that authentic strength arises from acknowledging reality as it is, including emotional reality. Like Medusa, who embodies both power and suffering, you can hold your emotions without being dominated by them. Developing this skill involves creating safe spaces for honest reflection. Journaling, trusted conversations, or even solitary contemplation allows you to explore your feelings without the pressure to perform. By validating your own experience, you cultivate internal authority. You learn that your emotions are data, not verdicts, and that your response is a choice, not a compulsion. The concept of emotional granularity is useful here. By distinguishing subtle shades of feeling, distinguishing anxiety from anticipation, frustration from righteous indignation, you increase your ability to respond deliberately rather than reactively. Medusa's multiple serpents can serve as a metaphor for this complexity. Every facet is acknowledged and integrated rather than ignored or punished. Another essential practice is premeditatio malorum, the Stoic exercise of imagining challenges before they arise. Anticipate situations where societal pressure might trigger perfectionist anxiety, then plan your response in advance. This mental rehearsal reduces the intensity of the actual emotional reaction and strengthens your capacity to remain aligned with your values. A daily ritual can help solidify these lessons. Each morning, identify one potential stressor or judgment you might encounter, and affirm your intention. I will respond with integrity, not with fear or self-criticism. Each evening, reflect on whether you met that intention and how you can improve tomorrow. This cycle builds resilience and reinforces emotional sovereignty. Exposure to imperfection continues to be vital. Intentionally share work that is complete but not polished to perfection. Express opinions you know may be unpopular, or allow yourself moments of rest without guilt. Each act diminishes the influence of perfectionist scripts and reinforces your authentic self. Recognize that setbacks are not failures but opportunities for integration. Every time anxiety or self-criticism arises, it is a reminder to observe, analyze, and choose. Medusa's gaze is a mirror. The challenge lies not in avoiding it but in holding your own power in the face of reflection. Connecting with others who practice similar autonomy provides reinforcement. Sharing strategies, witnessing others' courage, and receiving support strengthens the psychological foundation for resisting external pressures. Collective witnessing does not dilute individuality. It validates the reality that the perfect woman myth is a societal, not personal, burden. Finally, remember that emotional mastery is ongoing. There is no endpoint, no final perfection. Like Medusa, your strength lies in presence, in awareness, and in deliberate choice. Every day offers an opportunity to reclaim power from anxiety, pressure, and the internalized voices of expectation. Through consistent practice, you cultivate an unshakable inner authority that transcends societal scripts. By this point, you have explored the structures of perfectionism, learned to set boundaries, rewritten your narrative, and cultivated emotional autonomy. Chapter 5 focuses on consolidating these insights into a sustainable practice of radical authenticity. Being like Medusa is not a one-time transformation. It is a continual engagement with your values, choices, and identity in a world that constantly pressures conformity. The first step in this consolidation is the recognition that self-mastery is dynamic. Stoicism teaches that virtue is expressed through consistent practice, not isolated acts. Similarly, embodying your authentic self requires repeated engagement with your principles, especially when social pressures re-emerge. Each decision to act with integrity reinforces the neural and psychological pathways that support resilience. Another key principle is the deliberate cultivation of solitude. Choosing time away from constant scrutiny allows reflection and integration. In solitude, you can examine triggers, assess progress, and plan intentional actions. Medusa's exile, once framed as punishment, can be reframed as an opportunity to strengthen the self. Practically, this could mean daily quiet time, scheduled breaks from social media, or retreats from high-pressure environments. Integration of multiplicity is also essential. Like the serpents on Medusa's head, your many identities, career woman, friend, daughter, creative, lover coexist. Attempting to force these into a singular perfect role breeds tension and anxiety. Practicing acceptance and deliberate attention to each role allows for flexible identity management and reduces internal conflict. Physical embodiment complements psychological work. Mindfulness practices, yoga, or simple posture awareness reinforce a sense of control over your presence. How you occupy space communicates internal authority. Medusa's gaze is emblematic not only of defense but also of presence, grounded, self-contained, and unapologetically visible. A critical part of sustaining authenticity is embracing discomfort as a teacher. Social pushback, criticism, or internal doubt are not signals of failure, but opportunities to practice self-mastery. Every time you experience tension and respond according to your principles rather than fear, you reinforce inner authority. Medusa's gaze reminds us that power often appears as stillness and discernment, not aggression or submission. Daily reflection remains central. Each evening, review your interactions and decisions. Where did you honor your values? Where did perfectionist scripts creep in? This reflective practice transforms experience into insight, gradually reshaping automatic responses. Over time, you become less reactive and more deliberate, embodying a sense of calm confidence that is difficult to disturb. Community can be both a support and a mirror. Engage with women who share similar goals of authenticity, not to compare but to witness and validate each other's process. Collective observation highlights patterns you might not see alone, and sharing experiences reduces isolation, reinforcing that the struggle against societal perfectionism is structural, not personal. Stoic exercises like premeditatio malorum continue to be invaluable. Anticipating situations that may trigger anxiety or judgment allows you to plan responses aligned with your principles. When challenges arise, you act with foresight rather than compulsion. Each instance of deliberate response strengthens your resilience and diminishes the influence of external pressures. Finally, celebrate incremental victories. Recognize that every boundary upheld, every imperfection embraced, and every emotional response chosen intentionally is a step toward liberation. Being like Medusa does not mean being immune to societal pressure, but it does mean inhabiting your own power fully and consistently. This is the culmination of psychological freedom, living authentically, grounded in reason, and guided by your values rather than external expectations. By integrating these practices, emotional mastery, narrative rewriting, boundary setting, and deliberate reflection, you cultivate an inner authority that cannot be shaken by unrealistic societal ideals. Your identity becomes resilient, flexible, and self-affirmed. Medusa's archetype serves as a continual reminder that strength lies not in conformity, but in conscious presence and unapologetic authenticity. The journey to dismantle the myth of the perfect woman is ongoing, but every step toward self-definition is transformative. By embracing the Medusa archetype, you learn that strength lies not in compliance but in presence, awareness, and deliberate choice. Perfectionism loses its grip when you recognize that social approval is external, fleeting, and never a measure of your true worth. Your power comes from aligning actions with values rather than expectations. Through boundary setting, narrative rewriting, and emotional mastery, you reclaim agency over your life. Each decision to act authentically reinforces resilience and diminishes the influence of internalized ideals. Solitude and reflection are not retreats. They are laboratories for insight and growth. By observing your emotions, acknowledging your multiplicity, and integrating your experiences, you cultivate a self that is grounded, flexible, and unapologetically whole. Be like Medusa, unapologetic, self-defined, and unwavering in the face of societal scripts. Reject the illusion of perfection and embrace the complexity, strength, and authenticity that define you. Every choice to honor your values, every moment of deliberate presence, and every act of courage in the face of expectation is a declaration. You are not the perfect woman society prescribes. You are a conscious, autonomous, and powerful force. Stand firmly in your own gaze and let the world adjust.